In Book 10, Odysseus's men land on the island of Aeaea and make a fundamental navigational error. They split into two groups to explore, and the group that goes inland finds a large stone house in a clearing, with wolves and lions lying peacefully outside it, and from within it the sound of a woman singing while she works at a loom. They knock on the door and she invites them in. She gives them food and wine and then touches them with a wand, and they become pigs. They have their pigs' bodies and their human minds, and they're penned in sties. One man escaped, Eurylochus, who stayed outside and watched. He comes back to tell Odysseus, and here is the question that organizes the episode. What do you do when the danger is not a monster or a storm, but a woman of considerable power and considerable attraction, who has just demonstrated that she can dissolve the boundary between human and animal at will? The Circe episode is the wanderings at their most psychologically rich. Circe is a goddess. She's the daughter of Helios, the sun, and the granddaughter of Ocean. She's not a seductress in the simply villainous sense. She is a being of genuine power who inhabits her own domain and operates according to her own rules. Her island is not a trap laid for sailors who wander by. It is her home, and the men who come to her door have arrived uninvited. Her transformation of the men into pigs is the episode's central image, and it's worth understanding exactly what Homer means by it. The men retain their human consciousness inside animal bodies, and Homer is explicit about this. They know what has happened. They weep. They're not simply brutes. They're human minds in the condition of brutes. And this is what makes the transformation so disturbing. It is not that they have become animals. It is that the thin membrane separating human from animal has been made visible. This is the wandering's dominant image of what the world beyond civilization does to men. The Cyclops represented the pre-civilized human capable of speech and tending a flock, but without the social obligations that make human life possible. Circe represents something more interior and more uncanny, the dissolution of the boundary that keeps the human side of human nature in place. It is not an external force that threatens Odysseus's men on Aeaea. It is something they walk into willingly, lured by hospitality that turns out to be its opposite. Odysseus, armed with the herb moly that Hermes gives him to protect against Circe's enchantment, does not fall to the drug. When she touches him with the wand, nothing happens, and their encounter becomes a negotiation rather than a transformation. He forces her to swear an oath not to harm him. She invites him to her bed, and he accepts. Homer narrates none of this with moral commentary. Odysseus sleeps with Circe, and the poem does not judge him for it. This is worth dwelling on, not in a prurient way, but because it places Homer considerably in advance of most of his later interpreters. The Western literary tradition has, for most of its history, treated Circe as a straightforward figure of erotic danger. The enchantress whose pleasure corrupts, whose appeal must be resisted, whose island represents the seductive delay that keeps the hero from his proper purpose. Dante puts her in hell. Medieval Christian readings turn her into an allegory of carnal sin. Even modern versions tend to find some way of marking the episode as morally problematic. Homer does not do this. Odysseus sleeps with Circe, lives on her island for a year, and the poem's only gesture toward narrative consequence is that his companions eventually remind him it is time to think about home. When they do, he agrees immediately. The year on Aeaea is presented as a period of relative peace, a genuine interlude between the violence of the Cyclops episode and the terrifying necessity of the underworld journey that follows. Homer gives Odysseus pleasure without shame. That is a more sophisticated moral position than most of his inheritors managed. What makes the Circe episode genuinely interesting is not the enchantment, it is what comes after it. Once the initial antagonism is resolved, Circe becomes something remarkable. She becomes the most useful and knowledgeable guide in the entire poem. It is Circe who tells Odysseus he must go to the underworld before he can go home. It is Circe who gives him the exact practical instructions for the journey, what offering to make, which shades will come, what questions to ask Tiresias. It is Circe who, when he returns from the underworld, provides the detailed navigational intelligence he needs for the remaining dangers. The Sirens, Scylla and Charybdis, the cattle of the sun. She knows more about the dangers ahead of Odysseus than any other figure in the poem. More than Athena, more than the gods on Olympus, and she tells him everything he needs to know, without deception, without withholding. The scholars who note that Penelope gets the credit while Circe gets the depth are not wrong. Homer gives Circe one of the most practically important roles in the entire Odyssey, then removes her from it when Odysseus sails, but in the 10 books between their meeting and his departure, she is, in terms of actual functional contribution to the homecoming, his most valuable ally. There is a death buried in the Aeaea episode that almost no one mentions, and it is, in its quiet way, the most devastating detail in the entire section. Before Odysseus and his men leave the island, one of the crew, a young man named Elpenor, not particularly brave, not particularly clever, who has never been distinguished in any way, gets drunk and falls asleep on Circe's roof. In the morning, when everyone is preparing to sail, nobody thinks to wake him. He hears the noise, starts up in confusion, forgets where he is, and falls from the roof to his death. His companions do not notice, and neither does Odysseus, and the ship sails. He does not find out until he is in the underworld, when Elpenor's shade appears as the first of the dead to approach him, and Elpenor asks for burial. He has been lying unburied on Aeaea all this time. Odysseus had not known he was dead. Homer inserts this detail without emphasis or explanation. He does not pause to make a point of it. He simply allows it to happen. W.B. Stanford, in his study of the Odysseus figure across the tradition, remarks on Homer's habit of embedding genuine moral weight in this kind of peripheral narrative. The detail that passes unremarked, that requires a reader attentive enough to feel the weight it carries. What Elpenor's death tells us is that the year on Aeaea, for all its genuine warmth, is not a suspension of the wandering's ordinary cost. The wanderings keep producing casualties. The year of relative peace does not change this. A man can die falling from a roof in the middle of a comfortable year on a hospitable island, and the people who were supposed to look after him will not notice he is gone until they are face to face with his shade in the land of the dead. This is what Homer means, I think, when he allows the year to occur without moral judgment, but also without idealization. It is not paradise, it's an interval. Men get drunk and fall off roofs. Leaders, even good ones, fail to notice. The year is also structurally a preparation, and Homer makes its purpose explicit. Odysseus does not sail from Aeaea to Ithaca. Circe will not let him. She tells him he must first go to the underworld, to the edge of the world where the dead congregate before he can go home. The route back runs through the land of the dead. There is no shortcut. Whatever Odysseus has lost, his men, his companions, the years themselves, he must stand in front of it before the homecoming can begin. That restoration requires a reckoning. Odysseus cannot go home until he has stood in the land of the dead and looked at everything the war cost. His mother, his companions, the men who came back and were killed by their wives. The greatest warrior of the age, grey and diminished and envying ordinary mortal life. Only after that confrontation can the homecoming mean what Homer needs it to mean. The year on Aeaea is the pause before that reckoning, the month of hospitality, the navigational intelligence, the warmth of Circe's island, and the young man no one remembered to wake up, lying dead on the roof, while the ship prepared to sail. Homer does not judge the year, he simply shows it whole. Next week we're at the edge of the world. Circe has told Odysseus what to do. He must sail to the place where the rivers of the underworld meet, dig a pit, pour libations of honey and milk and wine and water, and wait. The dead will come to drink. They are diminished, insubstantial, incapable of speech until they have drunk blood. They are not the dead of later traditions, not the purposeful shades of Dante, not souls awaiting judgment, not ghosts with unfinished business. They are what Homer thinks the dead actually are: smoke and shadow, the human person without the body that's made it a person. I'll see you next Thursday.